I don't think I'm going to surprise anyone when I say the PS4 generation had some of the best titles we'll ever see in gaming. Sony was on top of the world with its 8th generation console system, releasing generation-defining masterpieces back-to-back, sometimes merely months apart. As you could see from The Last of Us and God of War announcements, the excitement was palpable. Everyone was keeping an eye out for Sony's newest titles. We knew that whenever they released something new, we would have one of the best gaming experiences of our lifetime. Also, this video is sort of a passion project of mine, as I myself became a gamer during the PS4 era. I remember when my parents bought me the console when I was 16, my dad called me from the store, and I specifically asked him to go around the store for half an hour just to find the Uncharted edition of the console. Yet if you take a look at the current PS5 generation, things are looking surprisingly bleak. No excitement for new Sony releases. At best, we get one exclusive every year, or at worst, not even every other year, and even those releases do not leave as big of an impression on us as they used to. Having been an avid Sony fanboy for around 10 years, and playing on nothing else but a PlayStation, even I switched to PC gaming around a year ago, and have even considered selling my PS5 altogether, which I never even considered as a possibility that I would ever do before all this. So what's happening exactly? Has Sony simply lost their magic touch? Are just gamers over Sony? Or perhaps there's something more to all of this? In this video, I'm going to discuss the reasons for how and why Sony's undeniable decline has happened, and whether this decline will last in the future. Sony's 9th generation console, the PlayStation 5, was released in 2020, amid a global pandemic. As hard as they try to hold on, companies had to realize that this is not going to be resolved for at least the next few years. Further delays would have caused even more trouble. Players were getting very impatient, the shareholders were losing their patience, everything was piling up. Therefore, both Sony and Microsoft released their products and hoped for the best. If you are familiar with new console releases, or in fact anything new releasing, you would definitely expect shortages. Maybe having to wait a few weeks or a few months for your console until they eventually make more. However, the PS5 and the Xbox Series generation releases were a historic and utter disaster. Scalpers bought up pretty much all the available units of consoles and sold them at exponentially higher margins than the original price. While scalpers bulk buy products was nothing new, there was one huge problem. Due to the pandemic, Sony could not make enough consoles to meet demand. Thanks to all this, there were reports that some people waited years for their PS5 consoles to arrive, or they had to resort to scalpers and buy one for thousands of dollars. I myself remember having to wait until the next spring, even though I pre-ordered the console months ahead of its release. The console shortage did not end until early 2023, nearly 3 years into the release of the new system. We are going to discuss how this affected new game releases in a different chapter. During the early stages of a new generation, we usually do not get many games, as they want to wait at least a short while for people to catch up and get the new system. But seeing the outrage and lack of available consoles in the market, Sony slowed down new game releases even further. Developers had to work from home, but even then, not all of them could be provided with the tech necessary to develop such demanding games. Nevertheless, even if all the developers were provided with all the necessary high-tech equipment, it would not have solved anything, as the biggest issue during this time was the lack of chance for collaboration between different departments. According to different reports, most game companies, whether developers, publishers, or service providers, are formed by small teams of friends or colleagues who work closely together, constantly sharing each other's work. Over-the-shoulder collaboration is central to how games are made. In addition, motion capture work was put to a halt immediately during COVID, and only voice actors with the biggest portfolios had the opportunity to continue their work from their homes. Dan Wojcik, senior creative director at Raven Software, said, "To not be able to just walk up and touch the screen and act out what I was talking about, I want the guy's head to turn this way. I was trying to do it real time in a video camera." Just the communication of that last 20% of the game was the most difficult part. Despite all of this, for the release of the PS5, we had 4 first-party exclusives: Marvel Spider-Man Miles Morales, Demon's Souls, Sackboy: A Big Adventure, and Destruction All-Stars. If you're thinking, what the heck is Destruction All-Stars? Oh, don't you worry, even Sony hopes that you've forgotten all about it. But that game was actually the start of the curse of multiplayer games at Sony, which we are going to discuss in a later chapter. If you take a look at these release games, you can see that a lot of money was spent on unoriginality. A DLC as a sequel/spin-off so they can sell it for more money, a remake, a sequel to a game that no one played, and a multiplayer game that you can only play on one platform. Multi-platform games did not pique players' interests either. Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War, Godfall, Watch Dogs Legion, Dirt 5, The Pathless, NBA 2K21 are not the type of games one would rush to play as soon as possible, even though they are popular. The only game we're discussing here would be Miles Morales, but that game was also available on the PS4, so there was no need to buy a PS5 to play it. And here comes the crux of the problem. Due to console shortages and no way to make more consoles to meet demand, Sony has elongated its release of the PS4 titles. They decided to release some other exclusives on PS4 as well as the new PS5. Surprisingly, this included some of their flagship titles, including God of War Ragnarok and Horizon Forbidden West. Since the PS5 was marketed as a device that's almost 6 times stronger than a PS4, jumping from 1.84 teraflops to over 10, players were doubtful that these games that are so graphically demanding could run on both systems well, worrying that Sony had back on fully utilizing the PS5's power for the development of these games. Not only that, but the release of these games was also ridiculously confusing. They released separate boxes for the PS4 and the PS5 versions. This by itself might not sound confusing, but there was a bit more to it than that. The PS4 version ran on both the PS4 and the PS5 with backward compatibility. However, certain titles still required users to pay an extra fee to get the PS5 version of the game running on their system, while other games did not. In addition, some PS4 titles were cheaper than their PS5 counterparts, even when they did not require an additional fee so you could play the PS5 version. This made it really confusing for users and gave them even less motivation to switch to the new console system. Despite all their success in the single-player field, instead of doubling down and providing their loyal users with even more and greater experiences, Sony decided to shift their focus to multiplayer games. Herman Hulst, the managing director and co-founder of Guerrilla Games, known for the Horizon franchise, was appointed to lead all first-party game development in 2019, right before the release of the PS5. Hulst decided to shift their focus to multiplayer games, which he publicly confirmed in 2021. In addition, he decided to expand their portfolio not only to PC gaming, but television and movies as well. I'm not diving into Sony's recent adaptations here, but I'm sure you've heard how those worked out. Instead, let's take a look at their multiplayer strategy and how it's been working out for them. I think one of the biggest reasons for this shift was trying to get the attention of casual gamers and, most of all, children. It's quite understandable why they tried this. If you take a look at Fortnite Battle Royale, which was released in 2017, it's made over $43 billion since its release, or GTA Online, with $10 billion since 2013, or Call of Duty with $31 billion. During the late 2010s and early 2020s, every gaming company was told to try to replicate what these companies have achieved, even ones who were known for their single-player experiences, but they failed to realize that simply making a multiplayer game does not equal endless cash flow. I believe if I simply mention the names Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League, Skull and Bones, and Conquered, you all know what I'm talking about. Conquered is specifically interesting for us as it was a Sony first-party release in 2024, and it died 2 weeks after its release, which I believe prompted Sony to cancel pretty much all of their multiplayer projects, including a Last of Us multiplayer, a Spider-Man multiplayer, and even a God of War multiplayer, and who knows how many unannounced projects. Since most of their focus was spent on these games, production on single-player games slowed down significantly. Following the release of Horizon Forbidden West in 2022, we didn't get a single Sony first-party exclusive until 2025's Ghost of Yotei. Only third-party games like Blade or Rise of the Ronin, which is pretty much just Sony buying exclusivity without being involved in development too much. 3 years without a first-party exclusive is absolutely ridiculous. I will always remember this. In 2018, the iconic God of War was released in April, and then only a month later, in May, Detroit Become Human was released. Neither of these games were exclusivity purchases. Both of them were developed by Sony Studios. Even if you take a look at the games they've been releasing currently, it doesn't look promising. There's tons of remasters, remakes, and re-releases on PC. We had, for example, The Last of Us Part 1, which was a remake, not a remaster, I'll give them that. But still, it was like the fourth Last of Us release at this point. There was a Horizon Zero Dawn remaster, which did nothing but make everything more orange, and the Until Dawn remake, which, let's be honest, is barely a remake because the game already looked spectacular. I believe the logic is very simple. If you do not provide your users with new content, they'll go and find it somewhere else. And you will never get any new fans releasing remasters and remakes for games that simply change the hair and the face of the characters, when you can buy the older version for $10, which for some of these games is only a few years old at this point. Oh, and also, should we even discuss the PSVR 2? Does anyone remember that Sony released a new VR this past few years? Or the dreadful PlayStation Portal device thingy? Okay, before you all leave, let's just move on to something a bit more substantial. Much to everyone's surprise, Sony ended its long-running PlayStation exclusivity on its first-party titles with the release of Horizon Zero Dawn on PC in 2020. Sony has been long known for its exclusivity strategy. While the original PlayStation in 1994 launched with titles like Ridge Racer, the first major, widely recognized first-party exclusive to define the console's early rivalry was actually Wipeout, released in September 1995. Another early iconic exclusive often associated with the console's rise is Crash Bandicoot in 1996. The PS2 had a significantly larger library of exclusives, must-play titles compared to the Nintendo GameCube and the original Xbox. These games, which spanned across genres, turned the PS2 into a must-have console, and thanks to all of this, the PS2 ended up being the best-selling console in history, with over 150 million units. Unsurprisingly, it was a shock to many that Sony decided to end the monopoly on their first-party exclusivity by releasing their games on PC as well. It was not a slow process either. From 2020 to 2025, they've released 13 of their biggest first-party exclusives on PC. While PlayStation users were initially upset, they didn't have any huge reactions yet, seeing these were all older, close to 10-year-old games. And the PC port releases were mostly random. However, in 2024, they released the PC version of Horizon Forbidden West, merely 2 years after the release of the PS5 version. This was a shock to many in the community, especially after Herman Hulst and Jim Ryan pretty much confirmed that all PS-exclusive games will get a PC release roughly 2 years after their PlayStation release. This would mean that there's no need to have a PlayStation anymore if you're patient enough to wait for the PC release, as it is now guaranteed. But the situation might actually be changing for the better. Based on reports in March of 2026, Sony is reversing its multi-platform strategy and returning to console exclusivity for its major first-party single-player titles. After around 6 years of releasing titles like God of War and Spider-Man on PC, Sony is pulling back due to a combination of disappointing sales performance and concerns regarding the long-term health of the PlayStation brand. While this might sound nice, unfortunately I do believe it's mostly PR. I think the biggest reason why Sony is pulling back on PC releases is because the new Xbox will run Windows on it, and Sony doesn't want people to be able to play PlayStation games on an Xbox. AAA games are expensive, even more so for Sony's titles. I'm sure you've seen the leaked budgets for The Last of Us 2 and Horizon Forbidden West being around $200 million for each, which excludes marketing costs. During the PS4 era, where most games ran at 1080p resolutions at 30 FPS, the PS5 was marketed as a huge step up. The original PS5 box promised 8K resolution is available, and games can run on 4K at 120 FPS. That's a drastic performance improvement compared to what even the PS4 Pro could achieve, so everyone was eager to see what next-gen gaming would look like. To say that final results were underwhelming is an understatement. At best, games run at 1440p 60 FPS on performance mode, meaning even the 1440p is not native, more like an upscaled 1080p. High-fidelity modes can offer native 1440p resolution or even higher ones in some games, but expect 30 FPS at best. Some games couldn't even keep to 30 on fidelity modes. Final Fantasy XVI, for example, could drop to as low as 720p on performance mode. Jedi Survivor did not get even close to 60 FPS on performance mode. Dragon's Dogma 2 offered 30 FPS in performance mode, and the famously infamous Gotham Knights did not even offer a performance mode and had a locked 30 FPS. Since then, Sony has completely removed the 8K and even the 4K marketing slogans from their boxes to avoid further controversy, but the damage has already been done. During the PS4 generation, the release of the PS4 Pro made huge waves. Games went from 1080p to 1440p. Not native of course, but still a step up. Or you could play more games at 60 FPS, which was a huge improvement at the time, as barely any games offered 60 FPS on consoles. This is also the time when performance and fidelity modes started to become more common in games, which has become the norm since then. And gamers were all eager to see the chance to catch up with their PC gamer counterparts, at least regarding FPS. I remember I bought a PS4 Pro in 2020, knowing that the PS5 is coming out later, just to play The Last of Us 2 at its most beautiful. The PS4 Pro sold quite well, functioning as a successful mid-generation refresh for Sony. So it's no surprise that they try to do the same with the PS5 Pro. Unfortunately, due to some interesting decisions, they decided to further alienate their audience with the release of the PS5 Pro. For example, it did not come with a disk drive. You had to buy it separately. People online were complaining that there's barely any difference in fidelity, and the only difference was slight FPS improvement in most games. However, the most worrisome factor was its price. Initially, it was sold for $700, which is already a huge step up, as the original PS5 was sold for $500. But now, in 2026, thanks to a new price increase, you can only buy it for $900. These new price increases are only going to inspire even more and more people to maybe switch to PC gaming, as it is now close to the same price as a PS5. All in all, I love PlayStation. I probably always loved PlayStation, but this is really not it. Thankfully, they just announced that Hideaki Nishino is taking over as sole president and CEO of Sony Interactive Entertainment, and while he did state that there will be focus on AAA single-player games, at least one per year, which is good, he also said that there will still be focus on live service, PC releases, which we now know is not true, and TV and movies as well. Time will tell. That was all for me. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave a comment, have a discussion with people, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next essay video. Take care now.